Happy holidays, everybody. It's your old pal, Colonel Crank here, back with an early holiday present, courtesy of good old Jeff Keighley, as he's announced the nominations for the 2024 Game Awards. Ah, yes, the Game Awards. A time-honored tradition where gamers get together, reminisce on what they played for the year, and think about what games stuck with them through engaging gameplay, captivating stories, and heated arguments whether or not a critic's review of a game is valid if they've yet to 100% it and, quote-unquote, get good. It may as well be part of the holiday rush. It certainly makes me want to do bad things to myself way less than Thanksgiving does. Alright, all joking aside, I am actually a little excited for the Game Awards. I know they're not really taking that seriously in comparison to the Oscars or the Grammys. Fuck, even most gamers kind of don't really take them seriously. But to me, there's a fun sense of community, of coming together, seeing what games you're rooting for, what games you felt should and shouldn't have been nominated, what games you personally would have had for your Game of the Year, and really just what the year has meant to you in terms of gaming. So I'm actually looking forward to the Game Awards. I took a look at all of the categories, which, by the way, goddamn, there are 29 categories. And I swear, some of them are just the same thing twice. Like, I looked at game direction and it's literally all the same nominees as Game of the Year, which I found a little bit funny. But this year the Game Awards have had a little controversy even before they began, and that's because it was announced that DLCs, expansions, and essentially new additions upon old games could be counted for Game of the Year. And sure enough, when the nominees were revealed, Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of Erdtree, was amongst the nominations for Game of the Year. And as you can imagine, people didn't exactly take this well, so I wanted to kind of throw my hat into the ring and give my opinion of this, along with the kind of the Game Awards in general and the nominations. And yeah, I kind of understand why people were annoyed by this. If you're going to nominate DLCs, it probably would have been best to just make a separate best DLCs and expansions category, because otherwise it kind of feels like instead of highlighting games from this year, you are simply using this opportunity to remind people of games that came out in previous years and remind people of games that have already been nominated for the awards. Elden Ring was not only nominated, but it won the Game Awards back in 2022. And so nominating its DLC for just straight up best game feels maybe a little redundant. Feels like we're just giving an excuse to possibly hand out an award to Elden Ring twice. But to play devil's advocate, I can also see why this decision was made, because DLC and expansions are something that can take a lot of work. There's something that can take a lot of passion, and sometimes can be as big as the games themselves. Fucking Elden Ring's DLC was almost as big as the base game. There are some games whose expansions essentially double them in terms of size. And so I understand the desire to highlight that work and to highlight that even if a game is technically done, that so much more work can go into it, so much more passion, so much more love can go into a game after its initial release. And if they made a separate category for best DLC and expansions, that brings us up to 30 categories right now. Again, there's already a lot of fucking categories for the Game Awards. That's a lot of nominees to pick out. And while I think some of them are maybe a bit redundant, or some of them I think could stand to be perhaps changed or rearranged a little bit, for instance, best direction is one of those awards that could probably be either altered or completely cut, because literally it is just the same nominees as Game of the Year, again, quite literally in this year's case. So I would recommend either changing that to best director and maybe highlight the individual directors. So instead of highlighting, say, Astrobot, you highlight the man who directed it, Nicolas Doucet, or maybe roll best ongoing and best community support into one award, since again, they often tend to overlap in terms of nominees, and I don't really see much of a difference between them. They both are essentially about, hey, we've kept this game ongoing for years, we've kept supporting the community, we've kept the game up to date, new expansions, new quality of life features, so on and so forth. And it's one of those things where it's like, if they're so similar, it might be best just to roll those two awards into one thing, and then replace the award that you rolled into the other one, replace that with best DLC. I think that would be a better choice. It's not as if the awards are completely against adding brand new categories, because they added best adaptation back in 2022, which I think was a good decision, because we're getting a lot more video game adaptations now between TV shows and movies. We just got the Fallout show, the Knuckles show this year. We got season 2 of Arcane. We're going to be getting the third Sonic movie in a few weeks. So it's like, yeah, there are enough video game adaptations now, and enough of them are actually good to the point where it justifies a best adaptation category. And if that's the case, then I feel like it would be long overdue for a best DLC category. In fact, that's probably one of those awards that should have been there from the very beginning, considering how heavily baked into modern gaming DLC as a concept is. And why Keighley simply didn't use this as an opportunity to introduce that category with Shadow of Erdtree, I do not know. Perhaps there weren't enough large-scale expansions to coincide with Shadow of Erdtree, but it's not as if there was nothing else this year. I know Diablo 4 just got Vessel of Hatred, so why not just like grab that, maybe see if we can find a few other expansions and turn that into a category and see how people feel about that, rather than effectively nominating Elden Ring again after it already won Game of the Year in 2022. And it's easy to understand why people are annoyed by this, though I do think some people are blowing it up a little bit out of proportion, saying that the awards are terrible this year, or that this ruins the awards for whatever reason. Look, I don't think it's that bad. I still am looking forward to the Game Awards. I just think it's a silly decision, and I think Keighley probably should restructure some of these categories for next year and consider something like a best DLC, maybe roll some of the current existing categories into each other so it doesn't feel as if it gets repeated as much. It could just be restructured a little bit is all I'm saying, but I'm still excited. I don't think this is necessarily the worst decision ever made. And as for the rest of the nominees, I have to admit I am actually getting pretty, not excited maybe, but I am having fun looking back at these games, looking at what I played for the year and thinking, man, that was good, but is it better than this? So real quick, I do want to talk about the other games nominated and really go through at least Game of the Year, the main category, and really talk about what I think about each game and which one I think should win Game of the Year. I'm not going to go over every category simply because there's quite a bit and I don't have an opinion on all of these. For particularly best content creator, ironically for someone who wants to be a YouTuber, I don't really keep up with a lot of content creators nowadays other than just the people I'm already a fan of. So I keep track of people like Jeff Rubb or fucking Jabroni Mike, but I don't keep track of a lot of the popular content creators. Like, good example is Queso, who everyone has been telling me is apparently a really popular streamer, but like I'm looking at this and he's literally just a guy outside of a fucking Waffle House, and I'm like, why is this man nominated for best content creator? I've never heard of him. And maybe that speaks more to me being out of touch, but it was just funny to look at this page and to see the first fucking nominee is some dude looking like he's been on a 4-day fucking bender sitting outside a Waffle House. But no, most of the categories are about what I expected. You have best family game, which is mostly Nintendo titles, and then Astrobot, which, I mean, Astrobot will probably win that. I don't think Nintendo really put out anything this year that really broke the mold and got people excited. Like, yeah, Echoes of Wisdom was okay, Princess Peach Showtime was okay. I'm surprised Mario and Luigi wasn't nominated here, but none of them got nearly as much hype or as excitement as Astrobot. That just kind of took over the scene for a month, so I fully expect that to win best family game. Best fighting game is Tekken 8 and Sparking Zero. I expect those two to win. I'm also, speaking of surprising nominees, why the fuck is Multiverses on here and not Rivals of Aether 2? Multiverses came back out of beta, even worse, slower and clunkier with terrible netcode. Not to mention it's constantly nickel and diming you for money. Whereas Rivals of Aether 2 actually like properly released this year. It didn't just come out of a beta. It was extremely well received. People loved it. And so I don't understand why that didn't get the nomination and Multiverses did. I assume Warner Brothers probably threw some money behind that to make that happen. I know they've had several adverts and they've even, I think, sponsored the Game Awards at a couple points. So Keighley probably just wants to keep the money men at Warner Brothers happy by nominating a WB game for best fighting, even if it almost certainly won't win. I'd be shocked if it was. But no, most of these categories are about what I would expect. Best adaptation, which I mentioned earlier, and honestly, I get the feeling Fallout probably has that in the bag. You have best ongoing, which feels like it's mostly the same nominees year over year. Like I sort of like the third year in a row, Final Fantasy XIV has been nominated for best ongoing, which hey, I guess in a way proves that it's worthy of the award if it keeps getting it again and again and again, because they keep the game updated and they keep the game ongoing. So hey, I guess that proves they should probably get the reward. Same with No Man's Sky. I've seen that a couple of times. Well, No Man's Sky is technically in best community support, which again, I'm not really sure what the difference is, so I don't really get why those aren't just the same award, especially when they share most of the nominees, but then they just have one or two different, which I'm like, why? Like at that point, just roll them into one award. Best ongoing and best community support, I don't get what the difference is. You have best debut indie. Plucky Squire should win that. That game was amazing. Talked about that on my channel before, and I am genuinely shocked that it is a debut indie because it feels like something that was made by seasoned developers. As for best indie itself, probably Balatro. I haven't played too much of that game because I'm not a poker person, but I love a good roguelite, and mixing poker with the roguelike gameplay structure of doing it again and again and again with different variables and benefits. You can contextualize through the idea of getting different sets of cards each round. So I'm like, okay, that was a really fun idea. I enjoyed what I played with it. I just need to sink my teeth more into it. And so that's the only reason why I don't have a stronger opinion on it. But seeing how much people love that game this year and how much I heard people talking about Balatro, playing it again and again and again, I can absolutely see why it was nominated for best indie. Same with Animal Well. Same with, honestly, Animal Well could also probably win best indie because I know that it is the first game from Big Mode, Donkey's big studio. So maybe that'll get it the push to win just from his fan base backing it because they are absolutely ravenous for him and pretty much anything he puts out, whether it be videos or even video games now. But the main thing I wanted to talk about is Game of the Year. That is the biggest category. That is, the crown jewel of the show. It's the award everybody talks about the most and everybody gets the most invested in. And honestly, I really don't feel much for it this year, mostly because a lot of these games here, don't get me wrong, some of them are great. Astrobot is a fantastic game. It is a love letter to PlayStation. It is a love letter to Sony's history and all of the series that they've cultivated throughout the years. Not to mention, it's the first PS5 exclusive to really feel like a PS5 game, to take advantage of the hardware and do things with that console that no other game does, particularly with the haptic feedback and the intense form of rumble. Like when you're running across sand, it uses the rumble to make it feel as if you are running across sand. It is genuinely one of the best 3D platformers I've ever played in my life, and that is a statement I do not make lightly, because 3D platformers are genuinely one of my favorite genres of games. It's like that and Metroidvanias, so I understand why Astrobot's there. I heavily appreciate it. It should also probably win Best Family Game. So after that, there's Balatro, which I already mentioned. Good game, but I don't feel a lot towards it. Black Myth Wukong, which I played, it was a decent action game. I had fun with it, but I'm surprised how quickly it fled from the public conscience, because that game was hyped up for years and years and years. And I was like, oh, this is going to be the next big step for graphics. This is going to be this amazing game that's going to look beautiful. And then it came out, it did look beautiful, but then it actually just kind of played just all right. It was a decent action game using the story of Journey to the West and all the strange characters and creatures from Chinese mythology. Did give it a distinct look at the very least, but ultimately it didn't really stick with people after it came out. It just kind of came, people said, yeah, it's good, and then moved on. So I kind of wonder why it faded from the public conscience so quickly. Not to mention there was all the weird shit with the review embargo of don't mention feminism or don't mention any of the previous history of the developers, which then got the game pulled into a fucking culture war discussion, because we can't ever have any major piece of media release without that shit happening. But at the end of the day, it was just kind of okay, so I don't really know what to say, and I don't really know why it's here, other than the intense amount of hype it had before release is the only reason why the game is getting nominated for Game of the Year, in my opinion. I have heard nobody talk about it nowadays, and people seem to just low-key forgotten it had come out, so that kind of feels like a weird pick. And then there's Shadow of Erdtree, which, putting the controversy aside about it being an expansion, being nominated for Game of the Year, honestly, I don't have a huge opinion on this. Like I said, I still haven't finished base Elden Ring, so this is something I will have to get around to at a later date. From everyone I've talked to about this expansion, they've said it's pretty good, that it is just, yeah, it's more Elden Ring, and if you want more Elden Ring, that's what you get. So hey, it did its job. I don't know if I would necessarily consider it Game of the Year worthy to just take a game you already like and give you more of it, but if Elden Ring won in 2022, then I can see how it could get back in on the strength of its expansion alone. And then finally, we have probably what is my Game of the Year, or at least the game I would pick out of these nominees, FF7 Rebirth, because this game is what I would absolutely call a full package when it comes to a AAA game. It not only looks visually beautiful, it plays wonderfully, it takes a lot of what FF7 Remake did well and just expands upon it, but unlike something like Erdtree, where it's just giving you more, it also tries to build upon it and add new elements and try to really like say, hey, what worked about FF7 Remake? Okay, what can we add on to that to make it still work, but also make it feel like a new experience despite being a sequel? Not to mention the story, for the most part, was excellent. I think that ending did get a little bit confusing, and I think by the time the game came to a close, I think it did get a little too confusing for its own good. But even then, I appreciate that they didn't just do a straight remake of FF7. I appreciate that they did try to do something different and go on a different path and make, hey, you think this is going to be a remake of FF7, and then bam, swerved ya. It's not. It's taking the structure of FF7 and building something new around it and swerving what you think is going to happen. So that's probably my favorite game out of all of these here, and if I have to vote for any one of these, I'm probably voting for that. And I don't know if it's going to win necessarily, since Elden Ring is so popular and Shadow of the Erdtree is, again, just kind of more Elden Ring. So I'm not entirely sure between Erdtree and FF7 Rebirth which will win. I don't really think Astrobot's going to win, just because I think that appeals to a very specific audience of PlayStation fan, longtime Sony fan, and fans of 3D platformers. I don't know if it's quite as like general to the quote-unquote AAA audience as something like Erdtree or 7 Rebirth is, but I hope it wins. Fuck, I hope it wins Best Family Game at least. It's better than pretty much any other game nominated for Best Family Game, except for Plucky Squire, which I think they're about equal. But no, I'm actually like not feeling super passionate about any of these choices other than, again, FF7 Rebirth and Astrobot. The rest of these games are all just like, yeah, they're okay, but are these really the best that 2024 had to offer in the year when games like Hades 2 or Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown or even Dragon's Dogma 2, That game was incredibly popular when it came out, and it stayed popular for a good few months. If anything, I'm surprised that game wasn't nominated for Game of the Year and was relegated to Best RPG for this year instead of getting like a Best of nomination. So I don't really know why they picked out the games they did when it was a year where you had plenty of options for more interesting titles. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown would have been a really good choice. Hellblade 2 would have been a really good choice. I don't understand why they went with what they did. It just seems silly. Like, even if you just replace Shadow of the Erdtree or Black Myth Wukong with Dragon's Dogma 2, I feel like that would be way more reflective of this year and way more reflective of what people were playing and enjoying this year, at least in my opinion. So, yeah, I'm not really feeling this year's Game of the Year nominees. In fact, I think most of the other categories probably have me more interested, and even then, I'm not really super passionate about any of the games here outside of Best Family, which again, Astrobot should win, Best Debut Indie, which should be Plucky Squire, and then Best Fighting Game actually has like a few decent choices between MVC Collection, Sparking Zero, and Tekken 8. If I had to pick one, I'd say probably maybe MVC Collection, though that's not entirely fair since that's more just excited that, hey, Marvel vs. Capcom is back. I don't think certain gamers realize how influential to the fighting game scene and gaming in general Marvel vs. Capcom was. Not only was it one of the biggest crossovers of its day, it's still one of the most beloved fighting game series of all time. It basically revolutionized, codified the idea of a tag-based 2D fighter. It didn't introduce the concept. Whenever you see a game like Dragon Ball FighterZ use that system, it is using it based off what Marvel vs. Capcom laid down. It became the new foundation for what tag-based 2v2 fighters looked like. Not to mention, it was a series that so many people thought was just like dead in the water after MVC Infinite came out, and it seemed like there was this big kind of wedge between Disney and Capcom with how bad MVC Infinite turned out, and both companies kind of blaming each other and not really wanting to work together. So there was just a lot of feeling that the idea of like, yeah, Marvel vs. Capcom, it's great, it revolutionized fighting games in a lot of ways, it was extremely important, but it's dead because the companies can't seem to work together. So for a lot of fighting game fans, this is basically a dream come true. This is basically a miracle of something they never thought was ever going to happen again, coming back in the form of this really high quality, really lovingly put together collection of all of the Marvel Capcom games, not even just the fighting game ones. They also threw in that like weird Punisher beat 'em up, which, you know, people kind of forget exists, but it's also really fucking good and should really probably get more love than it does. So it's just cool to see that come back as well. So yeah, this is just a really cool collection of some games that are important to fighting game history and gaming history in general. So for me, that's probably my pick for best fighting game, though I can also see why someone would pick Tekken 8 or even Sparking Zero. Again, the only nomination in that category that I really have an issue with is Multiverses. I really think Rivals of Aether 2 should have gotten that nomination instead, but for the most part, I don't really have a problem with that category. And then the last section of this, the last category that I'm really super invested in is Most Anticipated Game, mainly because I'm just stuck between two answers. I'm really stuck between two potential votes with Monster Hunter Wilds and Metroid Prime 4. Not to say I'm not excited for Ghost of Yotei or GTA 6 or Death Stranding 2, but for me, Monster Hunter and Metroid are so far up my alley that's genuinely hard to pick which one I'm more excited for between Monster Hunter Wilds and Metroid Prime 4. I did play the Monster Hunter Wilds beta, kind of left me running both hot and cold because even though the gameplay was really good, it wasn't optimized at all and kind of chugged on both console and PC, so that kind of worries me a little bit, but I'm still incredibly excited for that. So picking between that and Metroid Prime 4 is pretty hard. So far, I have my vote for Metroid. I might change that before the actual show comes out. I might change that to Monster Hunter, depending on how I'm feeling, because I'm incredibly excited for both of those games. But yeah, that's kind of my feelings on the Game Awards. I just wanted to put that out there, kind of give my feelings real quick, and I will probably cover the show when it happens on the, I believe, the 2nd of December. Perhaps I'll live stream that, or at the very least record my reaction and put it up there. But no, this is just a quick little video I wanted to make, give my thoughts on the whole Elden Ring DLC, give my thoughts on the nominations in general, and kind of just get myself into, this is gonna sound so silly, but get myself into the spirit, because this is legit like the start of the holidays for me. Like the Christmas season ends with Christmas and begins with the Game Awards, as silly as that sounds. So I am looking forward to it, even if I know it's not super serious. So just wanted to say that. Hope y'all are having a good time. I know it can be kind of rough out there with what's going on in the world, but if you ever need a safe space, if you ever need a place to come just laugh and talk about video games or movies or whatever, I'm here for you all. And I hope I can put a smile on your face whenever you need it. That's all I wanted to say. Have a nice night, and be sure to always crank up the noise. Like, comment, and subscribe. I have a blog spot. Check that out for my movie reviews. I reviewed Dragon Ball Daima, the Fathom event for that a little while ago. I might go review Red One because I've heard that movie is fucking awful. and I am genuinely curious. And definitely when the 20th rolls around, I want to do a review of Sonic Free. So yeah, y'all have a nice night. See you soon, and